They paid $15 a body. That was the rate. If your mother was buried in the Esopus Valley in 1909 and the city of New York had decided that the valley where she lay was going to become a lake, the Board of Water Supply would give you $15 to go dig her up yourself and carry her somewhere else. Not a team of undertakers, not a solemn procession. $15, and the expectation that you would handle it because the water could not be allowed to touch the dead. Contamination. That was the reasoning. The bones of your family were a public health problem now. More than 2,700 bodies came out of that valley before the flooding started. That's more dead people moved than living people displaced. Read that again because it's the strangest fact in this entire story. New York City evicted more corpses than citizens, and of those thousands of exhumed dead, 368 of them had nobody left to claim them. No family to collect the $15. So, 3 men, Matthias Berger, Alonzo Berger, and Joseph Hill, were contracted to move the unclaimed, and they carried them up to a new cemetery at the head of Watson Hollow, and they set over each one a bluestone marker 12 inches by 12 inches. No name on it. Just 2 letters indicating which vanished cemetery the body had come from, and a serial number. There are people in the ground in Ulster County right now whose only remaining identity is a 2-letter code for a graveyard that is underwater. And there were more than 100 others, graves that old records said existed somewhere in that valley that the surveyors went looking for and simply could not find. They searched. They ran out of time. And in October of 1914, they closed the gates and let the Esopus Creek back up over everything, and those 100-odd people are still down there. Never moved, never marked. Under 100+ years of New York City's drinking water, this is the story of how a city drowned 11 villages to fill a glass of water. And I want to be precise about that number, because you'll see other figures thrown around. 11 hamlets flooded or forcibly relocated: Ashton, Boyceville, Broadheads Bridge, Brown Station, Glenford, Olive, Olive Bridge, Olive City, Shokan, West Hurley, and West Shokan. Some counts say 12 communities. Say the names out loud once, because for 100 years almost nobody has. Let me back up to how a valley gets chosen to die. By the end of the 19th century, New York City had a problem that every great city eventually has. It was drinking faster than it could supply. The city had already dammed the Croton River up in Westchester and taken most of its tributaries. That system had been an engineering marvel in its day, and by 1900 it was nowhere near enough. Millions of people, tenements, hotels, factories, fire hydrants, horses. A city that runs on water and had run out of nearby places to get it. So the city's agents went looking further afield, and they found the Esopus Valley in the Catskills of Ulster County, about 100 miles north, in a natural glacial bowl carved out by the last ice age. Hydrologically, it was close to perfect. High elevation, so the water could travel all the way to the city by gravity alone through more than 100 miles of underground pipe. No pumping, no energy cost, just the patient pull of the earth. Clean mountain water, a valley shaped like a basin, as if the Ice Age had pre-built the reservoir and just forgotten to fill it. There was only one problem with the site, and the city's own language for it tells you everything. The valley was described as sparsely populated. Here's what sparsely populated actually meant. It meant 11 hamlets. It meant, in the Western Basin alone, 504 dwellings, 35 stores, 10 churches, 10 schools, 9 blacksmith shops, 7 sawmills and a grist mill. It meant farms that had been in families for generations, and boarding houses that filled every summer with vacationers coming up from the city on the Ulster and Delaware Railroad to swim in the Esopus, to float the creek on rubber inner tubes, to fish and to sit on porches in mountain air. It meant a telegraph office at Brown Station. It meant roughly 2,000 people, and by some counts 2,300, living a settled rural life in a place the Esopus people, the Lenape, who were displaced from that same valley generations before, had called Ashokan. Depending on which translation you take, it means place of many fishes or where the rushing waters meet, sparsely populated. That was the finding. And this is the part that never sat right with me. Not the dam, not the engineering, not even really the taking. It's that phrase, because sparsely populated isn't a lie exactly. Compared to Manhattan, 2,000 people across 13 square miles is nothing. But that's the trick of it, isn't it? You don't have to call people worthless to erase them. You just have to compare them to a bigger number and let the arithmetic do the cruelty for you. 8 million thirsty people on one side of the scale, 2,000 farmers on the other. Once you've agreed to weigh it that way, the answer's already decided, and everything after is just paperwork. And the paperwork came fast. On August 31st, 1907, the city accepted a bid from the contracting firm of MacArthur and Winston, $12.6 million to build the dam and its auxiliary dikes, 5.5 miles of masonry and earth. Construction began in earnest in 1907 and 1908. And in the spring of 1908, city officials started moving the residents of Olive out of their homes. The process took years, and it was chaos. Residents were offered sums on terms the city set, and here is the crucial part, with no real means of challenging the rates. The city condemned the land, named its price, and that was the transaction. Some people got as little as 10 days' notice to end a life their family had been living in that valley for a century. 10 days to decide what to take, what to sell, what to leave, where on earth to go. Not everyone went quietly. Frank and DeForest Bishop ran a boarding business in the valley, and it was profitable. The summer trade from the city was real money. It didn't matter. Theirs was the first house torn down to clear ground for the dam. First. Before anyone else had even fully absorbed what was happening, the Bishops watched their business come apart, and then they went to court over what they'd been paid for it, and they stayed in court for 4 years. 4 years of litigation against the city of New York over the value of a home that no longer existed while the lake that replaced it filled up behind them. They were not alone in that fight. The Ulster County Historical Society in Kingston holds tens of thousands of pages of condemnation hearing transcripts. Tens of thousands of pages. That is the sound of a valley arguing for its life in the only room where arguing was permitted, and mostly losing. And one litigant left behind a complaint that historian Bob Studing preserved, which cuts to the bone of how these things always seem to go, that influential people receive better awards than small fry. Of course they did. They always do. There's something in that. Now, the workers. While the valley was being emptied, it was simultaneously being filled with strangers, and the scale of this is genuinely hard to picture. By 1913, some 4,500 workers and their families were living in temporary camps around the site. Do the math against the towns being destroyed. The labor camps were several times larger than the communities they were erasing. A whole shadow civilization arrived to take the old one apart. And these camps were not tents. They were towns in their own right, with hospitals, dining halls, stores, taverns, brothels, sewage systems, water, electricity, and their own fire and police departments. Whole families lived there. The workers' children went to school together. There was even a newspaper printed in the Ashokan work camps, the Catskill Water System News. A city rose in the valley to drown the villages, and the city that rose had a newspaper covering the drowning. The workforce was mostly local laborers, but not entirely. Several hundred African-American workers came up from the South, hired in particular for their skill-driving mule wagons, and working across the whole range of jobs on the site. One of the first female civil engineers in the country contributed to the design of the reservoir's infrastructure, and the camps were segregated. Housing was enforced along racial and ethnic lines, with different groups in separate camps. So even the temporary city, built to erase the permanent one, reproduced every division of the era it was built in. It was dangerous work. Studing's history puts the death toll across the entire reservoir system at 288 people killed during construction. A specific figure just for the Ashokan portion isn't known. 288 men died building the plumbing that lets a city brush its teeth. And here's a detail I find almost too neat to be real. The depot at Brown Station, the railroad stop that gave the hamlet its name, one of the busiest freight and passenger stations on the Ulster and Delaware line, became the delivery point for the cement used to build the reservoir. The cement came in through Brown Station to build the dam. That drowned Brown Station. The village received, unloaded, and forwarded the material of its own execution, shipment after shipment, for years. Then they went for the dead. I said at the top that they paid $15 a grave, and I want to slow down here, because the exhumations are the part of this story that people flinch from and then can't forget. In 1909, the New York Times ran a piece with the headline that 300 dead lay in the aqueduct's way, and that the water board was out looking for their graves, looking for them. That's the posture. A municipal body wandering a valley with survey maps, trying to find where the bodies were. In total, roughly 2,700 bodies. Some counts say 2,600, the Town of Olive's records put it at 2,720, were removed from the floor of what would become the reservoir. They came out of 32 separate cemeteries scattered through the Esopus Valley, family plots, churchyards, small burying grounds behind farmhouses where 4 generations of the same name lay in a row under maples. There was no professional corps assigned to this. There were undertakers working over in Kingston, and rural families did use them, but no team was employed to oversee the relocations wholesale. Which means that in a great many cases, the disinterment of your grandparents was a chore that fell to you, with a $15 payment attached, in a decade when American families had already largely handed death over to professionals. These people had to go backwards, back to handling their own dead directly, with shovels, because a city 100 miles away needed the ground. Picture the specifics of it, because the specifics are what get you. A man in his 40s, in a wool coat, standing in a family plot he has visited every spring since he was a boy. The stones have been there long enough that the lichen has to be scraped off to read them. He knows exactly which one is his mother's, third from the wall, the small one because she died young. And he is not here to lay flowers. He has a spade and a wagon and a deadline set by the Board of Water Supply. His hands aren't steady. He works slowly and then faster, because slow makes it worse, and the sound of the blade going into that particular ground is a sound he is going to hear for the rest of his life. He does not talk while he does it. When it's done, he sits on the wagon board for a while before he takes up the reins. He gets $15. He never spends it on anything he can remember later. That happened, in some version, more than 2,000 times in that valley. 245 of the relocated burials of Olive residents went to Bushkill Cemetery, established in 1909 on land Matthias Berger bought. Bushkill now holds the remains of people gathered from 32 different vanished cemeteries. An entire valley's dead, consolidated into one plot of ground, sorted by numbered bluestone markers. If you go there today, there is a hidden section, a cemetery inside the cemetery, where those unclaimed 368 lie under their 2-letter codes. People have visited over the years. There are remnants of artificial flowers out there, decaying flags, small hearts left on graves belonging to people whose names nobody now knows. Somebody, at some point, cared enough to leave something for a stranger with a serial number. Then the villages themselves. The homes that could be moved were moved, hauled out of the valley by oxen, board by board, some of them rebuilt on higher ground where they still stand today, 110 years later, in Woodstock and Boyceville, and the reassembled fragments of Olive. Around 500 buildings were moved or demolished. 12.5 miles of the Ulster and Delaware Railroad line had to be relocated entirely. The Brown Station Depot itself was picked up and moved to a new stop called Ashokan, which opened on June 8, 1913. A railroad station that outlived its own town, went on serving passengers for another 40 years, and was eventually moved again to Woodstock in 1970, where it was restored. The building is still there. The village it was named for is under 8,300 acres of water. But what couldn't be moved, they burned. By 1913, the year the reservoir began to fill, every family whose property had been condemned along the Esopus Creek had been removed, and their homes and businesses were burned to the ground. Not left to rot, not simply abandoned, burned. Because anything organic left standing in the basin would foul the water, and New York City was not building a lake, it was building a drinking glass. So think about what the valley looked like in those last months. The people gone, mostly to towns within 25 miles, and this is one of the quietly devastating statistics in the whole account, that around 80% of the displaced stayed within 25 miles of the homes they lost. They didn't scatter to the cities. They moved just far enough to be out of the water, and then they stopped, and they spent the rest of their lives living a half-hour's drive from a lake, with their childhood underneath it. And in those final months, the smoke would have been visible for miles. House after house after house, put to the torch on a schedule. Barns, churches, schools, the stores, the boarding houses where city people had spent their summers. 10 churches, 10 schools, 35 stores. Somebody stood at the edge of that and watched their own house burn on a municipal timetable, and then turned around and drove a wagon up the hill to whatever came next. The trees came down too. Thousands of acres of farmland and orchard and woodlot cleared out of the basin. Then, in October of 1914, they closed it up and let the Esopus rise. In 1915, the Ashokan Reservoir went into service. And it was, by any engineering measure, magnificent. 8,300 acres, the largest reservoir in the world at the time. 122.9 billion gallons at full capacity. Nearly 13 square miles of surface water in a glacial bowl in the Catskills, engineered so carefully to the natural landscape that even critics called it beautiful. The whole system moved water to New York City by gravity through more than 100 miles of underground pipe, no pumps, and it still does. People compared it to the Panama Canal, which had opened just 1 year earlier. It was the first of 6 reservoirs the city would build in the Catskills between 1907 and 1965. The Ashokan was the template, the proof that it could be done. Today it supplies around 40% of New York City's daily drinking water. More than 1 billion gallons a day flows down out of those mountains. The water is still unfiltered, tested daily, and it is famously, genuinely excellent. The reason people make claims about New York bagels and New York pizza that they cannot entirely defend but will not abandon, that's the ledger. On one side, 2,000 people, 11 hamlets, 2,700 graves, 10 churches, 10 schools, 288 workers killed. On the other, one of the great public works of the 20th century and clean water for 8 million people, every day, for over a century, including today, including right now while you're listening to this. I'm not going to resolve that for you. I don't think it resolves. There's a story people tell about the reservoir, and it's worth telling even though it's not true. They say that when the water gets low, you can see them. Church steeples breaking the surface, chimneys standing up out of the shallows, the drowned village showing itself. People repeat it with total conviction. Someone's uncle saw it. Someone's neighbor photographed it. It's mythology. The engineers left nothing. They were thorough in a way that's almost hard to comprehend. The buildings burned, the foundations cleared, the trees felled, the dead exhumed, the basin scraped down to bare earth before the water came. There is no steeple. There has never been a steeple. When the Ashokan drops, what you see is mud and rock and old road beds. That's all. But people keep saying it anyway, generation after generation, and I don't think that's ignorance. I think when you erase a place that completely the human mind refuses the erasure and builds a steeple out of nothing just to have something to point at. Anyway, there's no steeple. That's just a thing people say. Which brings me to Vera. Her name was Vera van Steenberg-Sickler, and she became the historian of the town of Olive, the town the reservoir cut in half. She was of that valley. Her collection of papers sits in the Town of Olive archives today, handwritten notes and all, and researchers still work through it because she is the reason a great deal of this is documented at all. She spent her life recording a place that the city of New York had gone to enormous expense to make sure would not exist. And in the 1950s, 40 years after the water came, 40 years, she wrote something down that is not the language of a professional historian. It's the language of somebody who never got over it. She wrote that, to this very day, she bore a dislike for the people who took her beautiful town and divided it into 2 parts. And then she wrote the line that I cannot get out of my head, about the little hamlets along the Esopus Creek where a contented and happy people had lived, and how they were scattered like chaff in the wind. Chaff in the wind. That's a farmer's image. That's threshing. The useless husk blown off so the grain can be kept. She's telling you exactly how it felt to be on the wrong side of that arithmetic. Not destroyed, winnowed, separated out as the part that wasn't worth keeping and let go into the air. Sit with her at a desk in the 1950s. She is not young. The valley she is writing about has been underwater for 4 decades. Everyone she is describing is either scattered across Ulster County or in Bushkill Cemetery under a numbered stone. She has the maps. She has the names of the hamlets in her own handwriting. And she is writing all this down not because anyone commissioned it, but because she is the last line of defense against a place disappearing completely. And she knows it. Her hand moves. The word beautiful goes down on the paper about a town that has no buildings anymore. She does not soften the word dislike. She's had 40 years to soften it, and she doesn't. And the researchers who came after her found something surprising in those tens of thousands of pages of condemnation transcripts that buried in the dry legal record of who was paid what for which barn, you can still hear the local voices. People testifying about the value of a thing that can't be valued. That's the archive of this event. A legal proceeding accidentally preserving grief. Historians working today, like Bob Reinhardt at Boise State, have been trying to build an atlas of drowned towns across America. Every community lost to reservoirs and dams and flood control across the country. The count already runs to dozens documented, and he'll tell you the real total probably runs into the many hundreds and is likely impossible to ever fully tally. And he makes one distinction about Ashokan that matters. Out west, he's found, there were plenty of places where people were making a hard living on bad land and were frankly glad to sell to the government and move on. That is not what happened in the Catskills. In the Esopus Valley, people were not eager to leave. They were doing fine. The boarding houses were full, the farms worked, the trains ran. They lost something they wanted to keep. Today, the archaeologist April Baysaw walks that landscape and reads it like a text. The old cemetery is a pond now, with egrets and herons standing in it. The land parcels are still legible if you know how, stone walls and fence lines dividing forest that used to be fields. She can walk you to overgrown cellar holes and tell you whose they were. The Orchard Grove boarding house, the homes of Sarah Bishop, Catherine Van Steinberg, John Thiel, Louis Thiel. Each property had its own well, and the wells are still there, pockmarking the ground. There are signs posted around the reservoir now marking where the community stood. The direct memory is gone. There is no one alive who remembers Brown Station as a place where they lived. That threshold got crossed quietly, sometime in the last couple of decades, and nobody announced it. So, here's where I want to leave you. Tonight, somebody in Brooklyn will fill a glass at the kitchen tap. It'll take 4 seconds. The water in that glass fell as rain on the Catskills, sat in a glacial bowl at Ashokan, and traveled 100 miles downhill through the dark in a pipe, pulled the whole way by nothing but gravity. The same gravity that pulled the Esopus down that valley for 10,000 years before anyone thought to stop it. They'll drink it without tasting it. Why would they? It's just water. And underneath where it sat, there are cellar holes with no houses on them, and wells with no farms around them, and 100-odd graves nobody could find in time, still in the ground where the Esopus people fished before any of this, under 13 square miles of the best drinking water in America. Vera Sickler died with her dislike intact. The valley is still down there, doing what it was condemned to do, holding still, staying clean, being useful. And every year the water gets a little more anonymous, a little further from anyone who could tell you the names, until it's just a pretty lake on the drive to Woodstock with the mountains reflected in it, which is exactly what the engineers wanted, and exactly what she spent her whole life writing against. She lost. But she wrote it down, and because she wrote it down, you just heard the names of 11 hamlets that were supposed to be gone. That's not nothing. In the end, that might be the only thing that was ever going to survive the water. If you want to see what's left, the Ashokan Rail Trail and the Reservoir's Promenade are open to the public year-round in Ulster County, And the old Brown Station Depot is still standing in Woodstock, the building that outlived the village it was named after. Go stand on the dam if you get the chance. Subscribe, because next we're going to another American valley the water took where they didn't burn the buildings first. And the town is still down there, intact, in the dark. And tell me in the comments, 8 million people needed water. 2,000 people lived where the water was. Was there a right way to do this at all? Or only a less cruel one?